Grayson Mercer had survived betrayals and boardrooms built on lies, but nothing had prepared him for 4 whispered words from a woman who wasn't supposed to matter. The Mercer mansion sat high above Aspen, its windows fogged from the mountain cold outside and the chaos brewing inside. Wedding planners moved through the halls like a small army, carrying flower arrangements, seating charts, and swatches of ivory silk. In 6 days, 27-year-old Grayson would marry Vanessa Holloway, the woman everyone called perfect for him. Grayson didn't believe in perfect. He believed in loyalty, and Vanessa had earned his trust slowly, carefully, over 2 years. She never asked about his business. She never pushed for information she didn't need. To the outside world, she was graceful and composed, the kind of woman built for magazine covers and charity boards. To Grayson, she was calm in a life that rarely offered him any. That morning, he sat in his study reviewing shipment reports when Mabel Dawson knocked softly and entered with his breakfast tray. Mabel had worked in the Mercer household for 6 years. She was quiet, a little clumsy with the fine china, and constantly apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. Grayson barely noticed her most days, the way people rarely notice furniture that's always been there. But this morning, something was different. Mabel's hands trembled as she set the tray down. She glanced at the door twice before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Mercer, I think your fiancé is poisoning you." The words landed strangely, too quiet and too serious to be a joke, too impossible to be true. Grayson looked up slowly, studying her face for any sign she was overreacting to something small. But Mabel wasn't smiling. Her eyes were wide, almost pleading with him to believe her. "Excuse me?" he said, setting down his pen. "I saw her," Mabel continued, glancing toward the hallway again. "This morning, before anyone else was awake. She was in the kitchen, by your tea. She poured something into it, a white powder. It wasn't sugar, Mr. Mercer. I know what sugar looks like. This was different." For a long moment, Grayson said nothing. He had built an empire on reading people, on knowing when someone was lying to save themselves or protecting someone else. Mabel wasn't doing either. She looked terrified, like she understood exactly what kind of danger she was placing herself in by telling him this. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. Mabel's hands twisted the edge of her apron. "Because it's true, and because someone has to." Grayson studied the tea on his tray, the same imported blend he drank every morning without fail. He picked up the cup, swirled it once, and set it back down without taking a sip. "Don't tell anyone what you told me," he said finally. "Not the staff, not Vanessa, not anyone." Mabel nodded quickly, relief and fear mixing on her face. "Yes, sir." "And Mabel," he added as she turned to leave, "thank you." She paused at the door, surprised by the gratitude in his voice, then disappeared down the hallway. Alone in his study, Grayson stared at the untouched tea, his mind racing through the past few weeks. He had been more tired lately, forgetting small details he never used to forget, feeling foggy in meetings where he was usually the sharpest person in the room. He had blamed the stress of wedding planning, the demands of running his businesses across 3 states, the sleepless nights that came with his line of work. Now, a different explanation was forming, one he didn't want to believe. He thought about Vanessa, about the way she smiled when she saw him, the way she rested her hand on his arm at dinner parties, the way she always seemed genuinely interested in how his day had gone. Everything about her felt real. That was what frightened him most. The idea that someone could fake genuine so perfectly that even he, a man trained to detect deception for a living, hadn't noticed a single crack. He thought about walking straight to Vanessa and asking her directly. He could watch her face, gauge her reaction, end the uncertainty in seconds. But something held him back. If Mabel was wrong, he would damage a relationship built on years of trust over a misunderstanding. If Mabel was right, confronting Vanessa now would only give her time to cover her tracks, to explain away evidence before he even understood what he was dealing with. Grayson had learned long ago that the smartest move wasn't always the fastest one. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months, the private line to a physician in Denver who treated him under a different name whenever his work required discretion. He kept his voice steady, professional, giving no hint of the storm building beneath the surface. "I need to come in today," he said. "It's important." After ending the call, he glanced once more at the tea sitting untouched on his desk. 6 days until his wedding. 6 days to either prove Mabel wrong or discover the truth about the woman he was about to promise his life to. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out of his study with the same calm expression he wore into every business negotiation, the expression that gave nothing away. Inside, though, his mind was already racing through every conversation, every gift, every quiet moment with Vanessa over the past 2 years, searching for something he might have missed. Somewhere in his mansion, wedding planners were arranging flowers for a ceremony that suddenly felt uncertain. And somewhere close by, Vanessa Holloway was smiling through her morning routine, unaware that the man she was about to marry had just started asking questions she never expected him to ask. The countdown to the wedding had begun. So had the countdown to the truth. Denver looked different through the tinted windows of Grayson's car, grayer somehow, the way familiar places sometimes feel when your mind is somewhere else entirely. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mabel's frightened face, heard her whispered words repeating over and over until they lost all shape and became just sound. The clinic sat in a quiet part of the city, tucked between office buildings where nobody would think to look for a Mafia boss. Dr. Elena Reyes had treated him for 3 years under the name Alan Whitfield, a routine precaution for a man in his position. She never asked questions beyond what his health required, and he never offered explanations beyond what she needed to treat him. "Alan," she greeted him, closing the door to the private examination room. "Your message sounded urgent." "It is," Grayson said, sitting on the edge of the exam table. "I need a full panel, blood work, toxicology, everything you can run, today." Elena studied him for a moment, the kind of look doctors give when a patient is being deliberately vague. "Are you feeling unwell?" "Tired, forgetful, some days worse than others." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I want to know if there's something in my system that shouldn't be there." Something shifted in Elena's expression, professional curiosity sharpening into focus. She didn't ask why he suspected this. She simply nodded and began preparing the equipment, drawing blood with practiced hands, while Grayson stared at the ceiling, trying to keep his thoughts from spiraling. The wait was the hardest part. Grayson had negotiated deals worth millions without breaking a sweat, had sat across from men who wanted him dead, and never let his composure slip. But sitting in a small waiting room, watching the clock move slower than it had any right to, he felt something close to fear settle into his chest. 2 hours later, Elena returned with a folder in her hands and a look on her face that told him everything before she said a word. "There's something in your system," she said, sitting across from him. "A substance I don't see often. It's not something that would finish you quickly, and in small doses it wouldn't do much damage at all. But the levels I'm seeing suggest repeated exposure over time, not a single incident." Grayson's jaw tightened. "What does it do?" "In low, consistent doses, it affects cognitive function, memory, concentration, decision-making. Over weeks or months, it can cause fatigue, confusion, even mood changes. It's the kind of thing that builds slowly, so slowly the person taking it might not even realize something's wrong. They'd just think they were tired, stressed, getting older." Every word matched exactly what Grayson had been feeling for the past month. The fog during meetings, the uncharacteristic mistakes, the nights he fell asleep at his desk without meaning to. "How long would someone need to be exposed to reach these levels?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Weeks at minimum. This isn't a one-time accident, Alan. This is deliberate and ongoing." Elena leaned forward slightly. Whoever is responsible for this knows exactly what they're doing. The dosage is precise enough to avoid triggering alarm, but consistent enough to cause real damage eventually. Grayson sat in silence, absorbing what she'd told him. Mabel hadn't imagined anything. She hadn't misunderstood an innocent gesture. Somewhere in his own home, someone had been slowly poisoning him with enough care and precision to make sure he never noticed until it was too late. "I need you to keep this confidential," he said finally. "No records under my real name, nothing that connects back to me." "You know I always do," Elena said. "But Alan, whoever is doing this to you needs to be stopped. This isn't something to investigate quietly on your own timeline. This is dangerous." "I understand the danger," Grayson said, standing and buttoning his jacket. "That's exactly why I need to handle this quietly. If I confront the wrong person too soon, I lose any chance of understanding how deep this goes." Elena didn't look convinced, but she also knew better than to argue with him once his mind was made up. She handed him a copy of the lab results, sealed in a plain envelope with no identifying information beyond a case number. "Come back in a week. I want to track whether the levels change now that you're aware." Grayson thanked her and left the clinic, stepping into the cold Denver air with the envelope tucked inside his coat. The city moved around him, indifferent to the storm forming in his chest. Somewhere behind him, in a house full of wedding preparations and flower arrangements, someone he trusted completely had been quietly working to break him down. He thought of Vanessa's face, soft and familiar, the way she'd laughed with him just 2 nights ago over dinner, completely at ease. He thought of Mabel's trembling hands, the fear in her voice as she risked everything to warn him. 2 women, 2 very different pictures of the same household. One of them was lying to him in the most dangerous way imaginable. Sitting in the back of his car as it pulled away from the clinic, Grayson opened his phone and scrolled to a contact he trusted with more than just business matters. Cole Brennan, his longtime director of security, had been with him since the earliest days of building his empire. Cole didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply got things done. Grayson typed a short message, deleted it, then typed it again more carefully. He needed eyes inside his own home, someone who could move quietly and collect what he needed without drawing attention. He needed proof, not suspicion. Proof that could hold up against anyone, including a woman skilled enough to poison him without leaving a single visible trace. He hit send and watched the message disappear into the phone, already turning his thoughts toward the 6 days remaining before his wedding. 6 days to uncover the truth. 6 days to decide whether the woman he loved was truly the woman he thought he knew, or something far more dangerous wearing a familiar, beautiful face. Outside the car window, the mountains rose in the distance, sharp and unmoving, indifferent to the quiet war beginning inside the Mercer household. Grayson closed his eyes, not from exhaustion this time, but from the weight of what he now had to do. Trust no one completely. Suspect everyone, quietly. And find the truth before the truth found a way to bury him first. The Denver Grand Ballroom glittered with candlelight and crystal, filled with the kind of people who mattered to men like Grayson Mercer. Business partners, city officials, old family friends who had known the Mercer name for generations. Tonight's charity gala raised money across Colorado, and Vanessa Holloway moved through the crowd like she'd been born for exactly this moment. Grayson watched her from across the room, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand. She wore deep emerald green, her dark hair pinned up in soft waves, and she laughed at something an elderly donor said, her hand resting gently on the man's arm in a way that made him beam with pride at having her attention. She'd spent the last 20 minutes speaking with the hospital's director about expanding pediatric care, asking sharp questions, offering to personally fund a new wing if the numbers made sense. This was the woman everyone believed in, the woman his own mother had called a blessing before she passed. the woman who remembered the names of his employees' children and sent handwritten notes on their birthdays. Grayson felt the lab results in his coat pocket like a stone weighing him down. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" said Harold Whitmore, an old business associate, appearing at Grayson's side with his own glass of champagne. "You're a lucky man, Grayson. In this world, finding someone with a heart like hers, that's rare." "She is rare," Grayson agreed, forcing the words out evenly. He watched Vanessa excuse herself from the hospital director and make her way toward him, her smile widening as she approached. She slipped her arm through his, leaning close enough that only he could hear her. "Are you having a terrible time?" she whispered, amusement in her voice. "You've had that same look for the past hour, like you're calculating shipping routes instead of enjoying yourself." "Just thinking about work," Grayson said, matching her smile despite the storm underneath it. "Well, stop thinking about it tonight." She squeezed his arm gently. "In 3 days we get married, and after that I'm banning all business talk for at least a week. I mean it." She laughed, and it sounded exactly like every other laugh he'd heard from her over the past 2 years, warm and unguarded. Grayson searched her face for something, anything, a flicker of calculation or falseness beneath the surface. He found nothing, just Vanessa, exactly as she'd always been. For a moment, standing in that ballroom with her arm through his, Grayson felt something close to shame. Elena's lab results could be wrong. Mabel could have misunderstood something innocent, a supplement, a sweetener, something harmless that only looked suspicious in a dim kitchen before sunrise. He was letting exhaustion and stress build a case against a woman who had done nothing but love him faithfully for 2 years. He almost convinced himself of it. Almost. Then he remembered the doctor's words. Weeks of exposure, deliberate and ongoing. Not an accident, not a misunderstanding. Someone had been doing this to him with precision and patience. And precision and patience were qualities Vanessa possessed in abundance. Across the room, near the dessert tables, Mabel stood quietly among the catering staff, having been asked to help serve during the event since the mansion's usual caterer had fallen ill. She kept her eyes low, moving efficiently between tables, but every so often her gaze drifted toward Grayson and Vanessa, watching the same performance everyone else in the room was watching. Except Mabel wasn't fooled by it. She'd seen the version of Vanessa that never made it into ballrooms. As she refilled a tray of pastries, Mabel found herself thinking back over the past few months, piecing together small details she hadn't thought twice about at the time. Vanessa rarely entered the kitchen. She had never been the type to cook or prepare anything herself. That had always been the staff's job, and she'd seemed perfectly content to leave it that way. But over the last 6 weeks, she'd started appearing in the kitchen almost every evening, always around the same time, always with the same explanation. "I just want to make Grayson's tea myself tonight," she'd say, smiling warmly at whichever staff member happened to be nearby. "It's a small thing, but I like doing it for him." At the time, it had seemed sweet, thoughtful even, a fiancé wanting to care for the man she loved in small, personal ways. Mabel had thought nothing of it, had even mentioned to another housekeeper how nice it was that Vanessa took such interest in something so simple. Now, standing in a ballroom full of admiring guests, Mabel felt sick, remembering how easily she'd overlooked it. She thought about mentioning this to Grayson, finding a quiet moment to add these details to what she'd already told him. But the ballroom was too crowded, too many eyes watching, too many people who might notice a housekeeper speaking privately with the man of the hour. She would have to wait. Later that night, back at the mansion, Grayson sat alone in his study long after Vanessa had gone to bed, exhausted from the evening's festivities. He replayed every moment of the gala in his mind, every warm smile, every gentle touch, searching for cracks he hadn't been able to find in the moment. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mabel stood in the doorway, still in her work uniform, glancing behind her before stepping inside. "I remembered something," she said quietly. Vanessa's been making your tea herself almost every evening for the past 6 weeks. She never used to do that. She always said it was something small she liked doing for you, but she never explained why she started, or why now, right before the wedding. Grayson felt the pieces shifting into place, cold and undeniable. 6 weeks, the same time frame Elena had described as consistent with the levels found in his blood. "Thank you, Mabel," he said, his voice steady despite everything churning beneath it. "Keep watching. Don't say anything to her. Don't let her know you're paying attention." Mabel nodded and slipped back out into the hallway, leaving Grayson alone with the growing certainty that the woman sleeping upstairs, the woman everyone believed was perfect, had been quietly working to destroy him, one cup of tea at a time. The gala's warmth faded from the room, replaced by something colder and far more clear. 3 days until the wedding, and Grayson Mercer no longer had any doubt about what he needed to do next. The private jet cut through clouds over Texas, carrying Grayson away from Aspen, and, for a few hours at least, away from the woman he could no longer look at without feeling a knot form in his stomach. He'd told Vanessa the trip to Dallas was unavoidable, a last business matter before the wedding that required his personal attention. She'd kissed him goodbye at the door, told him to hurry back, and reminded him not to forget their final dress-fitting appointment together next week. He'd smiled and promised he wouldn't forget. The lie came easier than he expected. Mercer Holdings occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Dallas, the kind of building that announced power without needing to say a word. Grayson's employees moved with quiet efficiency around him as he arrived, none of them aware of the storm he carried inside. He greeted a few by name, reviewed a shipping contract that genuinely did need his signature, and then retreated to his private office, locking the door behind him. Cole Brennan was already waiting inside. Cole had worked security for the Mercer family for nearly a decade, ever since Grayson's father had hired him as a young man with sharp instincts and an even sharper sense of loyalty. He stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the city below with the patient stillness of someone who'd spent years learning to wait. "You got the samples?" Grayson asked, closing the door. Cole nodded, setting a small sealed case on the desk between them. "Collected everything from the kitchen 3 nights ago while the house was asleep. Tea container, sugar, coffee grounds, the filtered water pitcher, even the honey jar. Sent it all to an independent lab here in Dallas. Nobody connected to the family. Nobody who'd recognize your name." "And?" Cole's jaw tightened slightly. "Results came back this morning." He opened a folder and slid it across the desk. Grayson scanned the report, his eyes moving quickly over technical language and chemical breakdowns until he reached the summary at the bottom. Every sample had come back clean, except one. The tea container, the same imported blend he drank every morning, showed clear traces of the same substance Elena had found in his blood work. Not the sugar, not the honey, not the water everyone in the household drank from daily. Only his tea. "Someone's not being careless," Cole said quietly. "This is targeted. Whoever's doing this knows exactly what you drink, exactly when you drink it, and they've made sure nothing else in that kitchen is contaminated. That takes planning." Grayson stared at the report, feeling something settle in his chest that was heavier than confirmation, colder than suspicion. He'd hoped, in some small corner of his mind, that the lab would come back with a different answer, that everything might have an innocent explanation after all. "Vanessa's the only one who drinks that blend with me," Grayson said slowly. "She started making it herself 6 weeks ago. Mabel confirmed it." Cole didn't respond right away. He'd known Vanessa for 2 years, had personally cleared her background before Grayson proposed, had watched her integrate into the family with what seemed like genuine warmth. "I ran her financials again last month, standard pre-wedding review. Nothing unusual came up. No debts, no strange transfers, nothing that would explain motive." "Then run them again," Grayson said. "Deeper this time. I want everything. Every account, every transfer, every person she's spoken to in the past 6 months who isn't family or wedding related." Cole studied him carefully. "You think there's someone else involved?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Grayson admitted, the honesty surprising even himself. "But someone taught her how to do this precisely enough to avoid detection for weeks. Vanessa's smart, but toxicology isn't exactly a skill people pick up on their own." Cole closed the folder and tucked it back into the case. "I'll have something for you within the week. But Grayson, if this goes where I think it might, you need to consider what happens after you know the truth. This isn't just a broken engagement. If she's been poisoning you deliberately, that's attempted finishing. That changes everything, including how carefully you'll need to move." Grayson walked to the window, staring out at the city stretching beneath him, all glass and steel and in different motion. "I know exactly what it changes, Cole. That's why I need proof strong enough that no one, not the police, not the courts, not anyone in my family can ever question what happened here. I won't act on suspicion. I need certainty." "And if the certainty points somewhere you don't expect?" The question hung in the air longer than Grayson wanted it to. He thought about Vanessa's laugh at the gala, her hand resting on his arm, the way she'd looked at him like he was the only person in the room. If she was capable of that level of deception, what else might he be missing? Who else in his life wore a mask he hadn't thought to question? "Then I'll deal with that when I have to," Grayson said finally. "Right now, I need the financial records, and I need someone watching her communications without her knowing. No phone taps, nothing illegal that could compromise the evidence later. Just patterns. Who she's calling, who she's meeting, who benefits if something happens to me before or after this wedding." Cole nodded and gathered his things, pausing at the door before leaving. "For what it's worth, Grayson, I'm sorry. She fooled all of us." After Cole left, Grayson remained by the window for a long time, watching the sun begin its slow descent over Dallas. Somewhere back in Aspen, Vanessa was likely finalizing seating arrangements or approving flower deliveries, playing the role of a devoted bride with the same effortless grace she'd shown for 2 years. He wondered if she ever thought about him while she did it, or if he'd simply become a task to manage, a problem to slowly, quietly eliminate. He thought about calling her, hearing her voice, searching for some sign of guilt hidden beneath her familiar warmth. But he resisted the urge. Every conversation now was a performance, and he needed to become better at performing than she was, at least until Cole uncovered whatever connection tied this scheme together. The wedding was still coming, closer with each passing day, and somewhere beyond the woman he thought he knew, Grayson suspected there was someone else entirely, someone pulling strings from a distance, patient enough to wait for a payoff neither of them expected him to survive long enough to prevent. The financial report arrived 4 days later, delivered personally by Cole to a quiet corner office in Chicago, rather than risk sending anything digital that could be intercepted or traced. Grayson had flown in under the excuse of checking on a logistics warehouse near the city, another small lie added to the growing pile he'd been telling Vanessa over the phone each night. She still called every evening, her voice warm and slightly worried, asking when he'd be home, reminding him the wedding was now just 2 days away. Grayson matched her tone perfectly, telling her he missed her, that he couldn't wait to marry her, feeling the words turn to ash in his mouth even as he said them. Cole spread the documents across the desk in the borrowed office, methodical as always. It took longer than expected because whoever set this up knew how to hide money properly. Vanessa's accounts looked clean on the surface. Regular spending, regular income from her design consulting business, nothing that raised flags in a normal review. But she's been receiving transfers from a shell company registered in Delaware, small enough not to attract attention individually, but they add up to nearly $200,000 over the last 4 months. Cole slid a printed spreadsheet across the desk. The shell company traces back to a financial consultant named Ethan Calloway. Grayson stared at the name, unfamiliar, meaningless on its own. Who is he? Respected in certain circles, advises wealthy families on estate planning, succession structures, that kind of work. He's the type who gets brought in when someone's planning for what happens after they're gone. or when they want to make sure control of a fortune passes to the right hands. Cole paused. He's also been in contact with Vanessa for over a year, well before you two got engaged. The room felt colder suddenly. Grayson picked up the spreadsheet, scanning the transfer dates, the amounts, the pattern that emerged the longer he looked at it. The payments had started small and grown steadily larger, timed almost perfectly with the progression of his relationship with Vanessa. A modest transfer around the time they'd started dating seriously, a larger one after he proposed. The largest yet arriving just 6 weeks ago, the same time frame Elena had identified as the beginning of his exposure to the substance in his tea. "This isn't a coincidence," Grayson said quietly. "There's more." Cole pulled out another document, this one filled with phone records rather than financial data. She's been calling Ethan almost daily for the past 2 months, sometimes multiple times a day. I couldn't get the content of the calls, but the frequency alone tells you something. That's not a casual business relationship. Grayson felt something twist inside him, sharper than betrayal, closer to fury. He thought about every night Vanessa had sat across from him at dinner, asking about his day, listening with what seemed like genuine interest, while secretly speaking to someone else about him behind his back, someone helping her plan his slow decline. "What does Ethan gain from this?" Grayson asked. "If something happened to me, my estate wouldn't automatically transfer to Vanessa. We're not married yet. Even after the wedding, most of my holdings are protected by trusts my father set up years ago." Cole hesitated before answering. "That's the part that worried me most. I dug into Ethan's recent work and found he's been advising Vanessa on exactly that, how to structure influence over your businesses gradually, using her position as your wife to gain decision-making power over time, especially if your health started declining and you became less capable of managing things yourself. It's not about inheriting everything immediately, it's about control, slow, patient control, using your own declining judgment as the excuse." Grayson sat back, the pieces settling into place with sickening clarity. This was never meant to end him quickly. The doctor had said as much, that the substance built slowly, that in high enough doses over enough time, it would eventually erode his memory, his judgment, his ability to run his own empire. Vanessa wouldn't need to inherit anything. She'd simply become the trusted wife managing decisions for a husband no longer capable of managing them himself, with Ethan guiding every move from the shadows, taking his own cut along the way. "How long has this been planned?" Grayson asked, his voice quieter now, almost hollow. "Based on the timeline of payments and calls, at least a year, maybe longer." Cole closed the folder. "Grayson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually consider it. Are you certain you want to keep handling this quietly? This is bigger than a broken engagement now. This is a coordinated plan to slowly incapacitate you for financial gain. That's the kind of thing law enforcement needs to be involved in, not just private investigators." Grayson stood and walked to the window, staring out over the Chicago skyline, gray and heavy with clouds threatening rain. Involving the police meant losing control of the timeline, of the narrative, of how this all came to light. It meant public exposure before he was ready, before he had every piece of evidence locked into place so tightly that Vanessa and Ethan couldn't twist their way out of it with a clever lawyer and a sympathetic story. "Not yet," Grayson said finally. "I want this handled my way first. I want everything documented so completely that when this does become public, there's no room for doubt, no room for excuses. I want the wedding to happen exactly as planned, right up until the moment everyone is standing there expecting vows." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You're going to let the wedding continue?" "I'm going to let Vanessa believe it's continuing," Grayson corrected. "Right up until I have every piece of proof I need. The tea, the transfers, the calls, all of it. And then, in front of everyone who came to watch us get married, I'm going to show them exactly who she really is." The plan formed in Grayson's mind with the same cold precision he used in every difficult negotiation, every dangerous deal his family's business required. He wouldn't confront Vanessa privately, allowing her the chance to spin some explanation, to cry and apologize and manipulate her way back into his trust. He would expose her publicly, completely, with evidence too overwhelming to dispute, in front of the very people who believed she was the perfect fiancée. "I need everything finalized within the next 2 days," Grayson said, turning back to Cole. "Every document, every recording, every piece of proof organized and ready. Can you manage that?" Cole nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what Grayson was asking. "I'll have it ready. But Grayson, be careful. If she suspects anything before you're ready, she and Ethan could disappear, or worse, accelerate whatever they're planning." Grayson thought of Vanessa's voice on the phone each night, sweet and worried, utterly convincing. She had no idea he knew anything. As long as he kept performing the role of the unsuspecting fiancé, she would keep believing her plan was working exactly as intended. 2 days remained until the wedding. 2 days to gather everything he needed to end this the way it deserved to end, publicly, undeniably, and on his terms. Grayson returned to Aspen the following afternoon, stepping through the front doors of his own mansion like a man walking onto a stage he'd rehearsed for weeks. Vanessa met him in the entryway, throwing her arms around his neck with the kind of relief that looked, felt, sounded completely genuine. "I missed you," she said, pulling back to look at him. "One more day and you're stuck with me forever." "Can't wait," Grayson said, kissing her forehead, feeling the words settle strangely against everything he now knew. That evening, as the household wound down for the night, Vanessa disappeared into the kitchen, just as she had every evening for the past 6 weeks. Grayson watched from the hallway, staying just out of sight, his heart pounding in a way it rarely did anymore, even in the most dangerous business negotiations. He watched her move around the counter with practiced ease, opening the tea container, her back turned slightly toward the doorway. He couldn't see clearly enough to know for certain what she added, but he didn't need to see it. He already had the lab results. He already had the proof. When she carried the tea to him in the study 20 minutes later, smiling warmly, asking about his flight and his meetings in Chicago, Grayson accepted the cup with steady hands. "Thank you," he said, setting it on the desk beside him. He waited until she left the room before pouring the tea into a small container Cole had given him earlier that day, hidden inside his desk drawer for exactly this purpose. He refilled the cup with plain tea from a separate pot he'd prepared himself, one Vanessa had never touched. He drank it slowly, deliberately, in case she happened to check on him again before bed. This became the pattern over the final 2 days before the wedding. Vanessa would prepare his tea each evening, believing every sip he took brought her closer to the outcome she and Ethan had planned. Grayson would switch the cups the moment she left the room, preserving samples for Cole while pretending to feel the effects she expected, occasionally rubbing his temples during dinner, letting his words slow slightly when they spoke, feeding her the illusion that her plan continued working exactly as intended. "You look tired," Vanessa said one evening, concern etched across her face as she reached across the table to touch his hand. "Are you feeling all right? You've seemed a little off since you got back from Chicago." "Just stress," Grayson said, offering a tired smile. "Big week. Once the wedding's behind us, I'll finally get some rest." Vanessa's face softened with what looked like genuine sympathy, and for a moment, Grayson almost lost his composure completely. How could someone fake concern this convincingly while quietly working to destroy him? He'd negotiated with hardened criminals, faced down men who threatened his life without blinking, and none of it had prepared him for the particular difficulty of sitting across from someone he'd once trusted completely, watching her perform affection while planning his downfall. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Mabel had begun her own quiet documentation, exactly as Grayson had asked. Each evening, after Vanessa left the kitchen, Mabel would find a reason to be nearby, wiping down counters or preparing something for the next day, giving her an excuse to glance at the tea container and note the time on a small notepad she kept tucked in her apron pocket. She photographed the container discreetly with her phone, capturing the angle of the lid, small details that would prove someone had accessed it recently. She wrote down everything: the date, the time Vanessa entered the kitchen, how long she stayed, whether she seemed nervous or rushed or calm and practiced, the way someone becomes when they've repeated an action so many times it no longer feels dangerous. On the second night, Mabel nearly got caught. She'd been photographing the tea container when she heard footsteps approaching the kitchen doorway. She slipped the phone into her apron just as Vanessa appeared, having forgotten to grab a spoon. "Mabel," Vanessa said, surprised to find her there so late. "I thought everyone had gone to bed." "Just finishing up, ma'am," Mabel said, keeping her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "Wanted to make sure everything's ready for tomorrow." Vanessa smiled, grabbing the spoon from the drawer. "Big day coming up. I'm sure you're excited too. Grayson tells me you've been with the family for years." 6 years now," Mabel said carefully. "Well, I hope you'll stay on after the wedding. I think we'll make a good team running this household together." Vanessa's smile seemed warm, sincere, utterly convincing, and Mabel felt a chill run through her at how effortlessly the woman lied. "I'd like that," Mabel said, forcing her own smile in return. After Vanessa left, Mabel stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment, gathering herself before finishing her documentation for the night. She thought about how close she'd come to being discovered, how quickly everything could unravel if Vanessa suspected what she and Grayson were doing. She thought about the courage it had taken to speak up that first morning, and how much harder it had become now that she understood the full weight of what she was involved in. Later that night, Grayson met privately with Cole in a small room off the east wing, far from where Vanessa or any other staff might overhear. Cole had already begun compiling everything: the switched tea samples, Mabel's photographs and detailed notes, the financial records, the phone logs connecting Vanessa to Ethan Calloway. "It's coming together," Cole said, laying out the growing collection of evidence across a table. "The forensic specialist can review everything tomorrow in Vegas before the wedding. Once he confirms the samples match what we already know, you'll have something no lawyer can talk their way around." Grayson looked over the evidence, feeling a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak settle over him. Relief that the truth was finally becoming undeniable, heartbreak that the truth was exactly what he'd feared it would be. "One more day," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we finalize everything in Vegas. Then the day after, at the wedding, this ends." Cole nodded, gathering the documents carefully into a secure case. "She still has no idea?" "None," Grayson said. "As far as Vanessa knows, she's marrying a man slowly losing his grip on reality, exactly as planned." He paused, staring at the case now locked and ready for transport. She has no idea she's about to lose everything instead. Outside, the mountains stood dark and silent under a clear night sky, indifferent to the quiet war reaching its final stage inside the Mercer household. 1 day remained before Las Vegas. 2 days remained before the wedding that would never happen the way anyone expected. The private suite at the Bellini Grand in Las Vegas overlooked the Strip, all glittering lights and constant motion far below, a strange backdrop for the quiet, careful work happening inside. Grayson had told Vanessa this trip was a pre-wedding celebration, one last getaway with close friends before their lives changed forever. She'd been thrilled, packing her favorite dress, already planning which restaurant they'd try first. She had no idea the real purpose of the trip had nothing to do with celebration. While Vanessa spent the afternoon at the hotel spa, believing Grayson was meeting with old college friends for a bachelor lunch, he sat in a separate suite, 3 floors up, with Cole and a forensic specialist named Dr. Marcus Feld, a quiet, methodical man who'd spent 20 years testifying in cases far more complicated than this one. "I've reviewed everything you sent," Dr. Feld said, spreading a series of documents and photographs across the table. "The toxicology results from your blood work, the kitchen samples collected in Aspen, the switched tea samples from the past 2 nights. Everything is consistent. Same substance, same concentration patterns, same delivery method." Grayson watched him lay out the evidence piece by piece, each item another nail in a coffin he'd spent 11 days building. "Is it enough? Enough that no one could argue their way around it? Combined with the financial records and phone logs your security director provided, yes, Doctor. Feld tapped the folder containing Ethan Calloway's shell company transfers. This isn't circumstantial anymore. You have medical evidence, physical evidence, financial motive, and a documented relationship between the two parties involved. Any competent attorney would tell a client to settle rather than fight this in court. Cole leaned against the window, arms crossed. There's something else you should see before tomorrow. He pulled out his laptop and opened a folder containing surveillance footage from a private investigator he'd hired weeks earlier, before Grayson had even confirmed his suspicions about Vanessa. The footage showed a hotel lobby in downtown Denver, time-stamped 3 days ago, during the same window Grayson had assumed Vanessa was at a dress fitting. The footage showed Vanessa walking into the lobby, meeting a man Grayson recognized immediately from the financial records. Ethan Calloway. They sat together in a corner booth for nearly an hour, their body language relaxed and familiar, the kind of comfort that only came from years of close association rather than a simple business relationship. Grayson watched the silent footage, feeling something cold settle deep in his chest. He'd expected the meeting, had already suspected the depth of their connection from the phone records, but seeing it, watching Vanessa laugh at something Ethan said, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly before pulling back, made the betrayal feel newly sharp, freshly cruel. There's audio, too, Cole said quietly, captured through a directional microphone from an adjacent table. I'll warn you, it's not easy to hear. Grayson nodded, bracing himself as Cole played the recording. Vanessa's voice came through clearly, tinged with something Grayson had never heard from her before. Calculation, sharp and cold. He's getting worse, she said, forgetting things during meetings. His assistant mentioned he missed an entire call last week that he'd scheduled himself. Good, Ethan's voice replied. That's exactly the pace we want. Not too fast or people start asking questions. After the wedding, once you're established as his wife, we start introducing you into more meetings. Advisory role at first. Nobody questions a devoted wife wanting to support her husband. And once his judgment starts really slipping? Then you step in more directly. Power of attorney discussions, maybe. Family concerned about his well-being, wanting to protect the business he's built. It happens all the time with executives his age, except he's not even that old, which actually helps us. Nobody will suspect deliberate decline in someone so young. They'll think stress, overwork, maybe early onset issues. Sympathetic story, either way. Grayson closed his eyes, the recording continuing to play, each word another piece of the puzzle locking into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake made under pressure. This was calculated, rehearsed, discussed openly, between two people who had planned every step of his downfall with the same precision he used running his own businesses. That's enough, Grayson said finally, his voice steady despite everything churning beneath the surface. I've heard enough. Cole closed the laptop, giving Grayson a moment of silence before speaking again. I know this isn't easy to hear, but you needed to know exactly what you're dealing with before tomorrow. I appreciate the honesty, Grayson said, standing and walking toward the window, staring out at the lights below without really seeing them. Part of me kept hoping there was some explanation, some version of this where Vanessa wasn't fully aware of what she was doing, where maybe Ethan had manipulated her into something she didn't fully understand. He shook his head slowly. That recording erased any hope of that. Doctor. Feld gathered the physical evidence back into its case, organizing everything methodically for the following day. I'll have written reports ready by morning, formatted for legal use if you decide to pursue charges. Everything is documented, dated, and verifiable. Thank you, Grayson said. Tomorrow, at the wedding, I need everything ready to present. The lab results, the financial records, the footage, all of it. You're still planning to do this publicly? Cole asked. In front of everyone. Grayson turned back from the window, something hardening in his expression that hadn't been there before. The same look he wore during the most difficult negotiations of his career, when compromise was no longer an option. She was willing to slowly destroy me in front of everyone who loves me, using their trust in her as cover the entire time. She deserves to have the truth exposed exactly the same way, in front of every single person who believed she was perfect. Later that evening, back in their shared suite, Vanessa returned from the spa, glowing and relaxed, chattering happily about the massage she'd received and the dress she planned to wear to dinner. Grayson listened, nodding at the right moments, kissing her when she leaned in expectantly, performing the role of the devoted fiancée one final time. "Tomorrow we head back to Aspen," she said, curling up beside him on the couch, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then it's just one more day until the wedding. Can you believe it? After everything, we're finally here." "I can't believe it," Grayson said quietly, the words carrying a meaning she couldn't possibly understand. "Everything's about to change." Vanessa smiled up at him, utterly unaware that the man beside her now held enough evidence to end everything she and Ethan had worked to build. She had no idea that the wedding she'd spent months planning would become the very stage where her carefully constructed lies collapsed completely, in front of everyone who mattered. One day remained, and Grayson Mercer was finally ready. Napa Valley looked like something out of a painting that morning. Rolling hills draped in soft golden light, rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon. The historic estate Vanessa had chosen for their wedding sat surrounded by gardens in full bloom, white chairs arranged in perfect rows facing an arch wrapped in ivory roses. 200 guests filled those chairs by 11 o'clock, dressed in their finest, chatting excitedly, exchanging warm smiles with people they hadn't seen in months. Business partners sat beside old family friends. Vanessa's relatives, flown in from across the country, dabbed at their eyes even before the ceremony began, already overwhelmed with emotion. Grayson stood in a private room inside the main house, straightening his tie in the mirror, while Cole waited nearby, a secure case resting against the wall beside him. "Everything's ready," Cole said quietly. "Dr. Feld's reports, the lab results, the footage from Denver, financial records, all of it organized exactly how you asked. The moment you give the signal, I'll have it displayed on the screen set up near the arch." Grayson nodded, checking his reflection one final time. He looked calm, composed, exactly like a groom should look on his wedding day. Nobody watching him walk down that aisle in a few minutes would suspect anything unusual was about to happen. "How do you feel?" Cole asked. "Focused," Grayson said. "That's the only way I can get through this." Down the hallway, in a separate room, Vanessa stood in front of a full-length mirror, wearing a wedding dress that had taken 3 fittings to perfect. Her mother adjusted the veil behind her, tears already forming despite her best efforts to hold them back. "You look beautiful," her mother whispered. "Grayson is a lucky man." Vanessa smiled at her reflection, smoothing the fabric at her waist, feeling nothing but calm certainty about the day ahead. Months of careful planning had led to this exact moment, and everything had gone precisely as intended. Grayson trusted her completely, showed no signs of suspecting anything, and within hours, she would officially become his wife, one step closer to everything she and Ethan had worked toward for over a year. The ceremony began exactly on schedule. Vanessa walked down the aisle on her father's arm, radiant in white, while soft music played and guests turned to admire her. Grayson watched her approach from beneath the flower-covered arch, keeping his expression warm and steady, giving away nothing of what waited beneath the surface. The officiant began the ceremony with the usual words about love, commitment, and the journey 2 people chose to walk together. Guests smiled, some wiping away tears, none of them aware that the man standing at the altar had spent the past 11 days uncovering a plot designed to slowly destroy him. When the officiant reached the portion of the ceremony meant for the couple's personal vows, Grayson raised a hand gently, asking for a brief pause. "Before we continue," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden, "I need to say something to everyone here." A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the crowd. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly, though she quickly recovered, assuming this was some sentimental surprise Grayson had planned without telling her. "Thank you all for being here today," Grayson continued, turning to face the guests rather than Vanessa. Many of you have known me for years, some of you my entire life. You've watched me build this business, watched me navigate difficult decisions, and many of you have told me how happy you are that I finally found someone to share my life with." Vanessa's smile remained fixed, though something flickered behind her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty she quickly masked. "I need to tell you the truth about why we're gathered here today," Grayson said, his voice steady despite the weight of what came next. "This wedding is not going to happen." The murmurs turned to gasps. Vanessa's father, standing nearby, looked toward his daughter with confusion, while Vanessa herself stared at Grayson, her composure cracking for the first time. "Grayson, what are you doing?" she whispered, stepping toward him. He held up a hand, keeping his distance. 11 days ago, someone in my household warned me that you were poisoning me. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I trusted you completely, the way anyone should be able to trust the person they're about to marry." He gestured toward Cole, who stepped forward and signaled to the technician managing the screen positioned near the arch. "But the evidence doesn't lie, even when the people we love do." The screen flickered to life, displaying Dr. Feld's toxicology report in large, clear text. Gasps spread through the crowd as guests read the summary, confirming a foreign substance found consistently in Grayson's blood work, matched precisely to samples taken from his tea. "No," Vanessa said, her voice rising, panic breaking through her composure. "This is a misunderstanding. Grayson, please, whatever you think you found, let's discuss this privately." "We're past privacy," Grayson said quietly. "You made sure of that when you chose to do this slowly, patiently, in front of everyone who trusted you." The screen changed again, this time showing the financial records connecting Vanessa to Ethan Calloway's shell company, the steady stream of transfers timed perfectly with the progression of their relationship. Guests began whispering among themselves, disbelief and shock rippling through the rows of chairs. Ethan Calloway, seated near the back among the guests, rose from his chair, his face pale. He moved quickly toward the exit, but 2 of Grayson's security personnel intercepted him before he reached the garden gate, blocking his path without causing a scene loud enough to disrupt the unfolding revelation. The final piece of evidence appeared on the screen. Silent footage of Vanessa and Ethan together in the Denver hotel lobby, followed by a transcript of their conversation about Grayson's declining health and their plans to slowly gain control of his business. Vanessa stood frozen at the altar, tears streaming down her face. Though, whether from genuine remorse or the sudden collapse of everything she'd worked for, Grayson could no longer tell. He'd spent 2 years learning to read her every expression, and now he realized he'd never truly known her at all. "I can explain," she said weakly, though the words carried no real conviction, as if even she understood there was nothing left to explain. "There's nothing to explain," Grayson said, removing the ring from his pocket. The one he'd planned to slide onto her finger just minutes earlier. He set it down gently on the small table beside the arch instead. "Your own words did that already." Guests sat in stunned silence, some with hands covering their mouths, others simply staring at the screen, still displaying the evidence of a plot 11 days in the making. Somewhere near the back of the garden, standing quietly among the catering staff who'd traveled from Aspen to help with the event, Mabel Dawson watched the scene unfold, tears in her own eyes, knowing that her whispered warning 11 days ago had finally, completely, been proven true. 3 weeks passed before the Mercer estate felt quiet again. The news had spread quickly after Napa Valley, first through whispers among Grayson's business associates, then through more formal channels once the police became involved. Vanessa and Ethan were both charged, facing counts of attempted poisoning and financial fraud. Their lawyers argued for lesser charges, claimed misunderstandings, tried every angle available to them. But the evidence Grayson had gathered left little room for doubt. The toxicology reports, the financial records, the recorded conversation in Denver, all of it painted too clear a picture for any court to ignore. Grayson didn't attend most of the hearings personally, choosing instead to let his legal team handle the proceedings, while he focused on rebuilding what had nearly been taken from him. He testified when required, answered questions honestly, and otherwise kept his distance from the two people who had spent over a year plotting his slow decline. Vanessa reached out to him once, a letter delivered through her attorney, filled with apologies and explanations about how Ethan had convinced her this was the only way to secure her future, how she'd never truly wanted to hurt him, how she'd fallen into something she couldn't find her way out of. Grayson read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer he never opened again. Whatever truth existed in her words no longer mattered. The damage had already been done, and no explanation could undo 11 days of quiet, calculated betrayal. Back in Aspen, the mansion slowly returned to something resembling normal life, though Grayson found himself moving through it differently now, more aware, more careful. He installed additional security measures throughout the house, updated protocols for anyone handling his food or personal belongings, and began requiring background checks far more thorough than anything he'd used before. Trust, he'd learned, wasn't something to hand out freely anymore. It had to be earned, slowly, the same patient way Vanessa had used to plan his downfall. He thought often about how close he'd come to marrying someone capable of that kind of deception, how easily he might have continued drinking that tea for months, years even, slowly losing pieces of himself without ever understanding why. The thought still unsettled him late at night, when the house grew quiet and his mind wandered back to those early days of confusion and doubt. But alongside that unease sat something steadier, something he found himself returning to more often as the weeks passed: gratitude. One afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the wedding that never happened, Grayson called Mabel into his study. She arrived nervously, smoothing her apron, unsure why she'd been summoned, though her work these past weeks had been nothing but exemplary as usual. "Sit down, please," Grayson said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Mabel sat carefully, her hands folded in her lap. "Is everything all right, Mr. Mercer?" "Everything's better than all right," Grayson said, allowing himself a small smile, the first genuine one Mabel had seen from him in weeks. "I wanted to talk to you about something." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. 6 years ago, my father hired you to help manage this household, and you've done that job quietly and faithfully ever since. But 3 weeks ago, you did something far more important than managing a household. You saved my life, Mabel. You risked your own safety, your own job, to tell me something you had no obligation to tell me. Most people in your position would have stayed quiet, would have decided it wasn't their place to interfere in matters between me and my fiancé. Mabel's eyes filled with tears, though she tried to blink them back. "I couldn't stay quiet, sir. Not when I knew what I saw. That's exactly why I trust you more than almost anyone else in my life right now," Grayson said. "You had nothing to gain by warning me, and everything to lose. That kind of loyalty is rare, Mabel. Rarer than I ever understood before all of this happened." He slid a folder across the desk toward her. Mabel opened it slowly, her eyes widening as she read the document inside. A formal offer promoting her from housekeeper to estate manager, overseeing all household staff and operations across his properties, along with a salary that made her hands tremble as she held the paper. "Mr. Mercer, I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Grayson said simply. "You've more than earned it." Mabel wiped her eyes, nodding through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes. Thank you, sir." "Grayson," he corrected gently. "I think after everything, you've earned the right to call me by my first name." Over the following days, Mabel settled into her new role with the same quiet dedication she'd always shown, though now with a confidence that hadn't been there before. The confidence of someone who understood her voice mattered, that speaking up when it counted could change everything. The other staff members treated her with newfound respect, having heard whispers of what she'd done, though Grayson made sure the full details of that morning remained private between the two of them. Grayson himself changed in quieter ways over those 3 weeks. He spent more time reviewing his own instincts, questioning decisions he might have once made without hesitation, learning to sit with uncertainty rather than rushing toward comfortable answers. He rebuilt his business relationships carefully, reassured nervous investors who'd heard about the scandal, and slowly re-established the sense of control that had once defined every part of his life. One evening, weeks after everything had settled, Grayson found himself in the kitchen long after the household had gone quiet, staring at the same tea container that had started this entire ordeal. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and set it back down without preparing a cup. Some habits, he realized, would take longer to rebuild than others. Mabel found him there a few minutes later, checking on the kitchen one last time before heading to bed herself. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking," Grayson said, "about how close I came to losing everything, and about how the person who saved me wasn't someone with power or money or influence, just someone with the courage to tell the truth when it mattered most." Mabel smiled softly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Grayson nodded, watching her move through the kitchen with quiet confidence, no longer the nervous housekeeper who'd whispered a warning with trembling hands, but a woman who'd earned her place through honesty and courage when it counted most. He thought about how easily loyalty could be faked, dressed up in elegant dresses and warm smiles, and how genuine loyalty often came from the quietest corners of a person's life, from people who expected nothing in return for simply doing what was right. The mansion settled into stillness around them, safe now in a way it hadn't been for months. Outside, the Aspen Mountains stood dark and steady under a clear night sky, indifferent to everything that had unfolded beneath them, yet somehow fitting witnesses to a truth finally allowed to rest. Grayson Mercer had learned, in the hardest way possible, that trust wasn't something given freely to those who performed it most convincingly. It was something earned, slowly and quietly, by people brave enough to speak the truth, even when silence would have been so much easier.